Meeting for the Council for the 28th of June 2021. My name is Councillor Margaret Thomas, and as Mayor I will be chairing this meeting. We also welcome Councillor Lisa Cooper, who is calling in. Thank you, Councillor Cooper. I wish to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land we are meeting on this evening and share this message from the Elders. Kaya kaya Burdius Marman Yoks Coolanga, Nuna de Mort, Nitchakulan Nalamaya, Kalamunda Budja, Yayi, Nandurapan, Wajulus Coolan, Jina, Nuna da Nitcha, Nunga Budja, Nunga Burdius Kura, Yayi, Burda, Kadala, Burda, Kaya, Yunga. Hello, welcome to our leaders, men, women, family members who have come to our place today this evening. And I'm happy to see you standing on Noongar land of their leaders, past, present and future. Thank you. The operations of Council and the agenda for this meeting are governed by the provisions of the Local Government Act, Standing Orders and City of Kalamunda Code of Conduct. All matters of business listed in the agenda will be dealt with as separate decisions of Council. This meeting is also live streamed, and I would like to welcome those watching remotely. Thank you for your attendance and interest. CEO, are there any apologies and leave of absence previously approved?
No, there are not, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Public question time. We have two questions tonight, and I would like to ask Mr. Kerry Hoadley if he would like to come and ask his question. You can. Councillors, when you are speaking tonight, you're welcome to remove your masks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hoadley.
Yes, my question tonight relates to comments made on page 27 of tonight's agenda under item 11. And this is to do with the concession for refuse removal, which is being denied to pensioners. I'll read my question if I may, and then go through my comments afterwards. The question is, for what reason is the City of Kalamunda not being supportive of providing the concession for refuse removal to bona fide pensioners living in lease for life retirement villages such as St Ives Village, Lesmurdie? A bit of background to this. Now, I'm one of 22 residents who live in St Ives Village, Lesmurdie, and one of several pensioners. The pensioners are less than 50% of the total residents. We've lived in the Shire, my wife and myself, for over 40 years, and we moved into the retirement village in 2014. For the first 4 years of moving in, we received the pensioner concession on refuse removal. Before it ceased to be without any plausible explanation. I've had a lot of correspondence over the years with council staff, but I believe I've not been given a satisfactory reason as to why the decision was made to withdraw the concession. I have been in contact with the Director of Corporate Services, and I don't know if it's yourself, is it, Hanko? Mr. Gary Ticehurst, and he mentioned that the pensioner discounts were originally applied to primary owner occupied residential properties and not retirement villages. He said also that it was going to be part of the annual budget analysis procedure, which it was. He advised me to make my thoughts known to local councillors, and I did send copies of the correspondence to the South East Ward councillors. And I'd like to thank Councillor Stallard for your support in this. Occupancy of our village is on a lease for life, which means we don't actually own the village. We do, however, have arrangements whereby the rates and any other charges are paid by St Ives and are recharged to the residents. In order to get into the village, we paid between $550,000 and $560,000. It was equivalent to buying a house, in fact. The company that owns our village, which is St Ives, which is part of the RAC, St Ives is a for-profit organisation, which means we pay the full council rates, whereas other retirement villages in the council area, which are not for profit, pay no council rates. Last year I paid $1,771, which included $550 for rates. Probably as you know, the state government allows eligible pensioners a concession of 50% on council rates and some other charges. Now, eligibility is defined in the Rates and Charges, Rebates and Deferments Act 1992. And to be eligible, applicants must also be the owner and occupier of the property on the 1st of July each year. Those residents in our village who meet the criteria receive this concession, albeit several months later. They are deemed to be owners. Regarding eligibility, I think the following is relevant. All pensioner rebates and concessions are claimed under the Rates and Charges, Rebates and Deferments Act 1992. This Act allows for rebates to be claimed where a lease for life is in place, as the term owner is applied very broadly in this case. The units within the St Ives complex are not individually rated. Instead, the complex is rated as a conglomerate, and any rebates can be applied based on occupancy as at the 1st of July each financial year. Now, those words aren't mine. I'm quoting from a letter sent to me by the city's senior rates officer dated 7th of March 2014. Before moving in, I took the precaution of finding out whether we would be entitled to the same eligibility as we were before. And I was assured that this would happen. And in fact, it did happen for 4 or 5 years after we moved in before it ceased abruptly. Although the city's rate notice says refuse concession is offered under section 6.47 of the Local Government Act, this particular section opens with the words subject to the Rates and Charges, Rebates and Deferments Act, the same as a state government concession. Interestingly, we receive pensioner concessions from Western Power and from Water Corporation, as well as the state government. The only one we don't get one from is the city of Kalamunda, and we're not sure why we've been discriminated against. Finally, the decision not to provide us with a concession I'm hoping will be immediately reconsidered. I know it's down in the budget, it's going to be reviewed again in the following year, but this has been going on for 3 or 4 years now, and how much longer do we have to wait? And I hope that if the decision is made that we are in fact entitled to it, that we'll have some retrospective adjustment. I mean, if the Western Power and the Water Corporation, the state government can do it, why can't the city of Kalamunda? Thank you.
Thank you. I will refer to the Director of Corporate Services to give you a response, Mr. Hoadley.
Thank you.
Press the wrong button, apologies. Good evening, councillors, Mr Hoadley and staff. I won't attempt to try and respond on every one of the points you raised there, but I will actually respond to the broader question, and that is why has the city determined not to reinstate the concession applicable to retirement villages? You quite rightly point out that the concession was ceased in 2018-19, and the decision not to reinstate it is predominantly an equity-based consideration, insofar as the other retirement villages that exist within the city don't get those concessions. And further to that, there's very few other local governments that offer that same concession for retirement villages. And so in the context of this budget, the city took the view that it was inequitable to be reapplying that particular rebate for the reasons I've just mentioned. And further to that, it's the intent of the city to undertake a broader strategic review of all waste charges in the coming year as a preface to next year's budget. And obviously during that time, the city and council would then make a determination in terms of what the waste charges, not only for retirement villages, but waste charges broadly for the city, what they look like in the year moving ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Hoadley, for coming to speak to us. Not really, Mr. Hoadley. Public question time just allows a question. Thank you. Mr. Forrest, would you like to come and ask your question?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Councillors, officers present and other people observing. I'm referring back to the engagement that occurred during the development of the community strategic plan. Draw councillors' attention to...
Mr. Forrest, your question needs to be about what this agenda is about.
Yes, it's to do with the budget, Madam.
Okay, could you please make sure it's a question and not a deputation?
Yes, right. I'm concerned that during that consultation, which prepares the brief for the strategic plan that you're working on in the budget, that although the community expressed very strongly pro-environmental conservation views in that consultation, there are a number of programs to be delivered, a lot of programs to be delivered in the environmental area, and I think that I'd ask councils to consider the strengthening...
Mr. Forrest, I'm sorry to interrupt, but could you ask your question?
The question is asking council to consider the strengthening the staffing numbers that will be required to deliver the various related programs in the area of the environment.
Thank you. Which director would like to take that? Director of Asset Services?
Thank you for your question, Mr. Forrest. Good evening, councillors, members of the public and staff. I refer you to the draft corporate business plan to be adopted this evening, which sets out key actions to be undertaken by the city over the next 4 years. Those actions have been deliberately chosen that can be achieved within resources available to the city in foreseeable budgets, whether it be the use of external support staff or internal resources. So to put the short answer long, what we set out to achieve over the next 4 years in the environmental space is achievable within the resources that we've allocated.
Thank you, Mr. Forrest. Are there any petitions or deputations, CEO?
Through the chair, no.
There are no announcements by the member presiding without discussion. There are no matters for which the meeting may be closed. Are there any disclosure of interests?
Through the chair, I haven't received any tonight.
Thank you very much. We move on to reports, but before we do that, I would like to ask the Director of Corporate Services to give a brief outline of the budget tonight.
Thank you, through the chair. So this presentation is just quickly going to provide the context and the linkage between the reports that are before you this evening, because essentially those reports are to adopt the corporate business plan, to adopt the long-term financial plan, to receive the differential rate submissions, and to adopt budget 21-22. I'm sure you'll have all seen this graphic in front of you, which clearly articulates the integrated planning framework. And the local government integrated planning framework shows a clear linkage between the corporate business plan, Kalamunda achieving 21 to 25, the long-term financial plan, 2021 to 2036, and indeed the adoption of budget 2021-22. So councillors, way back in February we had our annual strategic retreat, and during that weekend city staff and councillors talked about current and emerging trends and issues that we were going to be dealing with in the next couple of decades. Out of that discussion, it was identified that we had a very strong need to focus on our assets, and that was primarily due to a couple of reasons. It was due to the fact that our infrastructure is ageing. It was due to the fact that we've got a number of new emerging communities, particularly in the foothills areas, that require modernised facilities. Also, we know our community has high expectations, particularly around quality of services and facilities, but also about affordability. So, out of that discussion, we arrived at what we've come to call the big picture, and I'll just reflect briefly on that. So, if we start in the top left-hand corner, we see big projects that we've got in the coming years: Motor Vale Reserve Master Plan, the Kalamunda Water Park, Stirk Park, Kalamunda Activity Centre Plan, Pickering Brook Expansion, Ray Owen Reserve, Pickering Brook Sports Club, Hartfield Park, Cambridge Reserve, particularly in the aged care space, the Woodlapine Hub, Scott Reserve, Kalamunda Road Upgrade, High Wycombe Aquatic Centre, and High Wycombe Library and Community Centre. And when you actually put all of those together, it's a pretty scary number. And it was that has been used to shape our future direction in terms of our long-term financial plan. It was that drives our focus in terms of generating advocacy funds from the Commonwealth and the state government. So tying it all together, as I say, the big picture shaped the long-term financial plan, and the long-term financial plan then informs the annual budget. So a little bit of context in terms of the city of Kalamunda. Excuse me. We're sitting at a population of just shy of 59,000 people. We've got 23,500 rateable properties. We take in an area of 324 square metres, and we've got a total asset base of $532 million. And going with those sorts of numbers, and particularly our asset base, we need to be planning not only for today but also to the future. And that presents us with some challenges, but we're up for it. So the budget that you're going to be deliberating on tonight proposes an increased rate in the dollar of 2.15%. It proposes that we fund an annual capital works program of just shy of $31 million. It projects a very slim and modest surplus of a little over $66,000. And importantly, it projects our reserves closing at the year end are just shy of $11 million. So how have we arrived at where we've got to tonight? I'm sure many of you will be delighted to get your Monday evenings back in the coming weeks. I thank you for that. We've been through a number of workshops commencing in the 19th of April, where we started with an overview of the long-term financial plan. We went through and tested the underlying assumptions. We went through some rate scenario modelling, looked at the first blush of capital works programs, and indeed councillor requests. Subsequently, we came back again and we went over the capital works program again, looked at the draft operating budget, and looked at our cash flow strategies. And then we came back again in May and looked at our differential rates advertising, and then reached in principle agreement on our capital works and our operating budgets. So, in looking at tonight's budget, in looking at our capital works, in looking at our operating budget, in looking at our proposed rate changes, we look at a number of economic metrics, a number of indicators. We looked at the local government cost index, which is forecast to increase 3.2%, street lighting, which is forecast to increase at 3%, and West Australian CPI, which is 1.75%. With respect to the local government cost index, that's based around a series of indicators in terms of the cost of road construction, building construction, quite different to what we call the normal CPI or basket of goods, basket of consumables. So the local government cost index is certainly impacted by what's happening in the building industry and in the housing sector at the moment. And prior to the budget ahead, we've also seen in the last 3 to 6 months increases in costs associated with contracts that we're going out to get tenders for building and construction. So it is moving in an upwards trend. This graphic actually shows just where our main revenue sources come from, and I mentioned, I think earlier, that we're quite heavily dependent upon rates. You'll see there 67 odd percent, 27% fees and charges, and the lion's share of that is in the waste service charge area. I make the point on the rates simply because, unlike some other local governments, we don't have items such as paid parking and some of the options like ex gratia payments that some of our neighbours get. And so therefore, we're an organisation that's quite heavily dependent on rates and what are the revenue diversification opportunities that we can get. The operating budget, in terms of where we spend those dollars, this is by program, so again you can see there that we're spending the lion's share in recreation and culture, community amenity and transport, and then there's a range of smaller items that make up the balance. Put another way, this is a busy graphic, I acknowledge that, but in terms of for every $100, you can see there that $19 waste goes to waste management, parks and environmental services 16, asset operations and maintenance 21. I won't go through them all. You can actually just see there in terms of for every $100, that's basically where the $100 goes. In terms of capital works for the year ahead, I mentioned that we've got near on $31 million capital works program ahead of us. And the big pieces of that are obviously in roads, 42%, land and buildings 16%, and then parks and ovals 11%, and then some smaller items in the other areas. So in terms of major projects in 21-22, this is just a grab basically from the capital works program. And we've just pulled out there what some of the larger items in the various categories. You'll see in parks and reserves, we've got 222k there for street planning, 316 for Sturt Park, Woodapine Living Stream 730, and for stage 3 of that project 700. In the roads area, we've got Railway Road and Elizabeth Street, Canning Road 1.2 mil, Central Mall of course 3.2. And I think importantly, the amenity improvements. We've got allocation of $2.2 million for the installation of female change rooms, long overdue, and certainly there to cater for certainly what has been a gap for us. Maida Vale Reserve flood lighting, 495k. Hartfield Park 335k. Gladys Newton Reserve 168, Ray Owen Reserve Car Park Expansion Project 944. Footpaths, Berkshire Road and Dundas Road 730,000, and then some other projects, the Managed Aquifer Reef Charge Project Stage 2 and the Ray Owen Water Investigation, 200,000, and Wollaston Transfer Station upgrade, $1 million. So I think you can see there that we got quite a diverse and I think Brett will tell us quite challenging program to deliver in the coming year, and I'm sure that once we get our budget adopted, the Asset Services team will be furiously making this all happen. So that's...
Councillors, do you have any questions? Thanks very much, Director.
I have one, Madam
Oh, I'm
Chair.
sorry, I didn't see you, Councillor Jardina.
Page 27, the retirement villages, item 11.
Sorry, page...
Page 27, retirement villages, item 11. You correctly said that we're going to be looking at reviewing the discounts in the coming months for the next budget. If we choose to still continue with discounts for waste for seniors, can we reinstate the ones for St Ives and others of the like?
Short answer, Council can do whatever you choose with respect to that analysis. We're obviously committed to come back with a view to looking not only at the retirement villages but waste charges overall, and it's Council's will to decide if you want to reinstate or adjust. It's a determination and a consideration.
I just I asked a question because I don't want it to be. I don't want anybody out there to think that because this hasn't happened or Council is going down the path of with item 11 that we're definitely going to be removing waste discounts for pensioners. That's not the case as yet. So if Council is going to be looking at that down the track, that is fine, but that decision will be made a little bit further down the track.
And if I may, there is a very clear distinction between the retirement villages and the waste charges.
Yeah.
And so the retirement villages, as I said, was something that was ceased a couple of years ago. The waste charge rebate is still in place, and to that end, if you look at it in that context, the value there is about 780,000, and that works out to a subsidy of about $35 per head. And so they're questions that Council will obviously have to determine, and we will certainly be bringing through briefing sessions to you, Council, to help inform that for next year.
Councillors, do you have any other questions of the Director of Corporate Services, Councillor O'Connor?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just following on from that previous question, the earlier speaker tonight, I think he said something like along the lines of it wasn't in the Act as such, it was in another part of an Act that the Council was obliged to provide a discount. Can the Director clarify if that was correct, or if maybe I misheard it, but I'm pretty sure that's what the Speaker was saying.
Thank you. Through the Chair, I might field that given the familiarity I have with waste discounts. The other part of enabling legislation, the state government allows pensioners to achieve discounts on their rates, and conceivably that's how it's mechanised through their rates statement. The city's waste charges are a standalone charge. It's a city decision how it apportions those charges and allows pensioners to have a discount on their waste charges, because it's a separate charge and it's not part of the rate statement that would achieve a pensioner discount through that other enabling legislation and that's finance in Treasury. Because Treasury actually refund the city the pensioner discount they get through rates.
Through the Chair, he was referring to the Rates and Deferment Act, Councillor O'Connor, which does entitle a pensioner if we roll the rubbish rate into the rate, but we've never done that, we've kept them separate. then they would get that right as they currently get their 50% rebate on their rates. They would also get it on their bins if we rolled the rate or the cost of the bin into the rate. But we've looked at that in the past, and it has some inequities to other rateable properties within the city if we did that.
Councillor, is there any more questions to the Director before we go to the reports? If not, I'll go to the first report, which is the corporate business plan. Are there any questions? Councillor Stallard.
Yes, thank you. Through the chair. I noticed in the corporate business report, and I'm looking at around pages 53, 54, 55, and some of the areas it mentions that we are looking at, just to paraphrase what it's about, is looking at alternative energy, say more green energy, but also reducing our electricity. Am I in the right section here?
Yes, you are.
Okay, good. I was worried there for a minute. And in looking at that, there were some things that haven't quite been put in there, but one of the ones that have we or will we get around to looking at getting batteries or putting batteries into these areas, into say like some of the city facilities, such as the admin building and some of our other buildings around, because we're putting solar panels up. But down the track, is that something that we can embrace or can look at, or maybe
Definitely.
are we like at home? I'm still waiting for the batteries to come down in price,
Yeah.
and
So are we, Councillor. That's
Okay.
the problem. The battery technology
Yes,
is still at the innovative stage of its development. So it's the return on investment isn't that good at this point in time. So we
Okay.
think that we need to develop our sustainability strategies, get them in place, and wait for them to become like mainstream costings, a bit like how solar panels, when they first came out, were really expensive, whereas now they're not. We envisage the same thing, the same trend will happen with battery technology, and then we'd be looking at it. So likewise with the solar farm, as we go forward with the solar farm, that has the capacity to have battery storage too, but not yet. It's just too early, and it would cost us far too much to, and we wouldn't get a return on investment. So in the future, yes.
Follow-up question. That was
Follow-up question,
yes,
Councillor
I
Stallard.
assumed that, but I just thought I'd better ask it, just to put it out there that we are considering it, and I think that's important because we hadn't written it, but I think it's important to have it noted. But on top of that as well, is there an opportunity somewhere in our planning or in the future where we think about we're using our the good drinking water, we're using that for toilets and all that sort of stuff? Is there any opportunity that we could start thinking about putting tanks, and I'll come back to this old one I've raised before, in some of these buildings to channel it in so that we can reduce the use of our good drinking water in for toilets and other activities like that, and even to supplement some of the gardens around some of the buildings?
Director of Asset Services.
Grey water recycling, are you across that,
Yep,
Director?
thank you. And thank you for your question, Councillor Stallard. I'll refer you to page 59 of our attachment with the corporate business plan, undertaking water audits and identifying and implementing quick win improvements, and also on our irrigation systems to look at inefficient or ineffective water usage. So issues such as reuse of rainwater, which is what it boiling down to in your question, would be examined in those sort of catch-all issues. Of course, some of the commentary we have to deal with, of course, is the Public Health Act in terms of reuse of potable water.
Okay, thank you, through the chair. I assume that this could have been the possibility, but I'd raise it because I hadn't seen the mention of tanks, that's all. So
Thank you, Councillor
just put it
Stallard.
out there.
It makes it clear for the public, which is a good way of asking the question.
thank you.
Are there any other questions regarding the corporate business plan? Councillor Sewell.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Now that Councillor Stallard has undergone that line of questioning, I assume that we will, when we go out to consultation in terms of addressing the climate emergency, that those sort of considerations could be taken into account and would be incorporated in any future planning, just to confirm.
Director.
Yes, thank you, through the chair. Thank you for your question, Councillor Sewell. Of course, the council decision that was actually before us last in May was to prepare our climate emergency strategy and undertake community consultation on the same by 30 June 2022, which is on our plan.
Thank you. Last call for questions. Councillor Stallard.
Sorry to come back with another one. Reading one of the statements in there about green corridors, I was under the assumption that we'd been developing the green corridors and trying to enhance them, and down the track looking at having the opportunity wherever possible to try and get hold of land or to help people with their land to retain bushland to enable the corridors. So when I saw that we were looking at into the future, is that a continuation of what we're doing, or is this a new basis that we're heading in, or a new direction to say that we're now going to be pushing for green corridors? Sorry. I thought it was around, I think it was on page 49 or somewhere like that. Was
Thank you, through the chair. Thank you, Councillor Stallard. It's actually, yes, it's in the Kalamunda Clean and Green.
Yep.
It's set down for the outer years. Those actions are proposed in those years, cognizant of the eventual adoption of our biodiversity strategy and urban forest strategies, etc. And it's just the task that we can be achievable during the next 4 years. It's on the plan for 23-24 and 24-25.
Thank you.
If there's no other questions, is there a question from Councillor Cooper.
Okay, go for it, Lisa.
Thank you. Through the chair, it's page 31 of the report, or page 33 of the document, but there's it's development services and projected service level changes, and there's a one FTE to undertake environmental planning. I was just wondering when that was likely to happen, when that person would be commencing in that role, or is that happening now?
Director of Development Services.
Through the chair, thank you for your question, Councillor Cooper. The advertising of that position has just recently concluded, and the city is working through a shortlisting of candidates, and the selection process and interviewing will occur over the coming month, pending the adoption of the budget this evening.
Thank you.
If there's no other questions, another question from Councillor Sewell.
Sorry, it is a follow-up question, Madam Chair, from Councillor Stillard's questioning. If we could just have an update, please, on the local biodiversity strategy and the urban forest strategy. If we could get an update in terms of where those two documents are at, what status they're at, please.
Director of Development Services.
Through the chair, thank you for your question, Councillor Sewell. The city's in the process of reviewing submissions and reviewing the draft strategy documents as outlined within the report to council this month at the OCM. They are envisaged to be presented to council for final adoption by the end of this calendar year. That's at this stage. Our scheduling is by the end of this calendar year to be presented to council for final adoption. We're currently working through the submissions and validating the information within the draft documentation.
Follow-up question, Councillor Sewell.
Yep. Could you just explain what that validation looks like, just so that I've got an understanding of what that means, please?
Director.
Yeah, through the chair, it's validating data and the like that was contained within the draft documentation, and ensuring that the actions align with the revised corporate business plan and budgeting and long-term financial plan that's presented to council this evening.
Is there a mover for the officer recommendation on page 10? Councillor O'Connor, and seconded by Councillor Stallard. Is there going to be any debate? I'll put the motion. All those in favour?
Yes.
That is carried unanimously. Thank you, Councillor Village. We now move on to the long-term financial plan, and I will go to questions, councillors. No questions? Perhaps I could get a mover then for the officer recommendation on page 18. Councillor Sewell, and seconded by Councillor Blair. Is there going to be any debate, councillors? If not, I'll put that motion. All those in favour?
Yes, in favour.
That is carried unanimously. We now move on to differential rating. Are there any questions? Councillors. Councillor O'Connor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just noticed the two objections listed. Can I ask the Director if there were any more objections to the rates that were advertised?
Director of Corporate Services.
Well, sorry, just strangling myself in this, excuse me. Through the Chair, no, they're the only ones that I'm aware of that were submitted as objections. Had a couple of emails that came in fact one email that came in, not a couple, that had some comments but wasn't actually listed as an objection.
Are there any other quick follow-up question, Councillor O'Connor?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can the Director please give us, the Council, a dollar figure, very roughly, for what the 1% increase might represent to the City?
Through the Chair, so that increase of 2.15% rate in the dollar would equate to $29.82 for a property with a GRV of $20,000. So it obviously differs according to what the GRV is. So with a GRV of $20,000, $29.82.
And so just a follow-up question. So what is the actual amount to the City, though, in terms of, we're talking $600,000?
So I'm not sure of your question. The additional revenue?
Yeah, what does 1% of it?
So 1% of rate revenue is 380,000.
Okay.
So would be 760, about 800,000.
Okay, thank you.
I've got a question, follow-up question on that. Is a $20,000 GRV a typical sort of average house in the City of Kalamunda?
I would have to say it's probably on the low side with the recent increases and spikes in rent. So it's probably a little bit on the low side.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? If not, is there a mover for the officer recommendation on page 24? Councillor O'Connor, seconded by Councillor O'Donnell. Is there going to be any debate, councillors? If not, I'll put that motion. All those in favour?
Yes, in favour.
Carried unanimously. We now move on to the adoption of the budget, which is in different sections. Are there any general questions? And then I'll also go to questions as we go to each section. Are there any general questions, councillors, on the adoption of the budget? If not, let's go to part 1 on page 36. Are there any questions on the elected members' fees and allowances? If not, I will ask for a mover for that officer recommendation on page 36. Councillor Blair, seconded by Councillor O'Donnell. Is there going to be any debate, councillors? I'll put that motion. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Part 2, schedule of general fees and charges on page 37. Are there any questions? And I thank councillors who've asked questions and shared them with other councillors prior to tonight's council meeting. It's very helpful. If there's no questions, can I have a mover for the officer recommendation on page 38? Councillor O'Connor, seconded by Councillor Blair. Is there going to be any debate, councillors? If not, I'll put that motion. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Part 3, other statutory fees. Are there any questions, councillors? We're on page 39. And the officer recommendation is on page 40. I have a question. My first question is, how are we going to pay back the 200,000 for Forestfield North structure, that loan? And my second question is, what is our capacity for borrowing and how much have we used of that capacity in case we had an emergency? I'll refer to the Director of Development Services.
If I may, Madam Mayor, you've jumped onto part 4 and you've given me a heads up on the questions for part 4, so thank you very much. I'm most grateful.
Sorry. Let's go back to part 3. Sorry, it's on the same page. Are there any questions on that? If not, I'll ask for a mover. Councillor Blair, seconded by Councillor Sewell. All those in favour?
Yes, in favour.
Carried unanimously. We now go on to new loans, and I apologise for jumping forward, and you've got my 2 questions.
Amazing, I actually foresaw those 2 questions. So the current loan to be taken out is for 200,000 and as stated in there, it's repayable over 10 years at a rate of 1.5%. Our current borrowings are sitting at...
So my question was, how will we pay that back?
We will pay that back through the developer contribution plan.
Thank you.
And their second question, I believe, was the current borrowings. So we're currently sitting at 10.1 million. The additional 200,000 would push that up to 10.3 million. And we have a borrowing threshold of approximately 30 million.
Thank you. Are there any other questions about loans, councillors? Councillor Giardina.
On that 200,000, I understand, correct me if I'm wrong, but I understand that the 200,000 is for the next 12 months and it'll take 10 years for us to collect that 200,000. Is that correct?
I'll pass the collection over to the Development Services Director.
Through the Chair, the collection of funds through the Development Contribution Plan will be subject to approval of that Development Contribution Plan through a scheme amendment to the City's local planning scheme, which will require Council, West Australian Planning Commission and ministerial approval. Once that development contribution scheme is in place and development occurs within the Forestfield North, High Wycombe South precinct, progressively contributions will be collected on a proportional basis, with parts of those contributions going towards the funding of administrative items, with the cost of preparing structure plans and preparing development contribution schemes and administering those as part of that administration component in accordance with the state planning policy. As years progress and development progresses, contributions will be collected and those funds will go towards paying back this loan. At this stage, it's very difficult for me to provide you a time frame for the complete payment of that specific $200,000 and other administrative costs that have been incurred to date. It's really dependent on the rate of development and the rate that those contributions are paid, but notwithstanding, the City would prioritise the payment of administration components within the development contribution plan, and that priority will be assessed by Council on an annual basis against other priorities within the scheme, namely land acquisitions, the provision of roads, drainage and the like.
So the first question was that 200,000, that's only for the next 12 months. And then we will collect it over probably 10, 20 years, 15 years, as you just said.
Correct.
So that's correct? Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions regarding loans? If not, I'll ask for a mover for the officer recommendation on page 40, the bottom half of page 40. Councillor Sewell, seconded by Councillor Stallard. Is there going to be any debate, councillors? I'll put the motion. All those in favour?
In favour.
That is carried unanimously. Part 5, Muni Fund Budget. Are there any questions, councillors? Is there a mover for the officer recommendation on page 41? Councillor O'Connor, seconded by Councillor Blair. Is there going to be any debate? I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Thank you. Part 6, General and Minimum Rates, Instalment Payment Arrangements and Incentives. Are there any questions, councillors? Councillor Ritchie.
Yes, thank you. Through the chair, I noticed the heading for it is general and minimum rates, instalment payment arrangements and incentives for early payments. I can't see any incentives for early payments other than the fact that you pay your full rates. Is that almost by default that that's the incentives? Because we used to have an incentive scheme, and I'm just wondering if there is something that I'm missing in there.
Development Services?
Through
Director of Corporate Services.
that's correct, Councillor Ritchie. So through the chair, we're not running the incentive programs. We ceased at COVID.
So it's just an error with the title?
Yeah.
Should have been, that should be removed, and incentives for early payment shouldn't be in the title. Thanks.
That's what I was thinking.
Councillor Ritchie, follow-up question.
And a follow-up question, I'm not sure if this is the place for it. There was some concern a couple of years ago, and I had raised it with the director, about the extra charge if you pay by credit card. And although in one year it didn't appear on the rates, then it did. Whether in fact we talk about, minimum rates and so on, whether in fact this should actually be outlined in the process. In other words, if you pay by credit card, you will pay extra. If we're looking about whatever we talk about, whether it should be in the budget process or whether it is sufficient just to put it on the rates so that people do know what they're up for, because it can be missed on that rate notice. And I did have, as I think I'd mentioned to you, a number of complaints previously about why it costs extra for the credit card. Thank you.
Director of Corporate Services.
So I'll take that on notice and look at how the rates notice is being printed. I don't have the text obviously in front of me, so happily take it on notice.
Councillors, do you have any other questions?
It's really just a follow-up to that, so it doesn't need to be put in here. It really just should be part of the rates notice.
As I mentioned, Councillor Ritchie will have a look at, so I don't think it needs to be specified in the budget. It's just how we actually disclose it in the rates notice.
Okay.
Through the chair, just specifically, the credit card fee is imposed by the provider, not by the council. So it's for using that facility, so therefore it's not something that we adopt.
Are there any other questions? If not, is there a mover for the officer recommendation, part 5 on page 41? Councillor Stallard, seconded by Councillor Giardina. Is there going to be any debate, councillors? If not, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Councillor Giardina? Oh, sorry. Councillor Boyd, are you in favour? Sorry, I just missed it. That's unanimous. Thank you, councillors.
Madam Chair, can I just say that over a period of time, there's been a lot of criticism of how council works, not our council. I'm talking about most councils. It come at budget time that we just adopt, pass. But little do people know the amount of work that goes into coming up to a budget, that what we do. And although council tonight, there's a series of questions asked, are very good questions, but we do a lot of work behind the scenes, and people are not aware of that, where a lot of the stuff gets thrust out before we come to this evening. So I think we need to sort of highlight that wherever we can in the public arena, that does happen. So, I do see that on Facebook from time to time. People that are saying that council just rubber stamps things on a budget evening. Good. Well, here we don't.
Good point, Councillor Giardina, and we also have had a lot of questions asked and answered prior to this council meeting. So I do take your point, and there is a lot of work goes into this for all of us.
And may I add that was the point of the director's presentation, to outline all of those workshop sessions you had every Monday, every second Monday during April, May through to June. So yeah, it's weeks and weeks of work. And we started in February, remember, at the strategic retreat, a whole weekend. Councillors gave up 2 days of a weekend to set the budget and set the parameters. So yes, there's extensive work that goes into formulating a $50, $60 million, business.
Thank you. We're moving on to part 6. Are there any questions, councillors? This is on page 41. Page
Material variances.
part 7, material variance. Are there any questions? I'll ask for a mover. Councillor O'Connor, seconded by Councillor Blair. Is there going to be any debate, councillors? I'll put the motion. All those in favour? And that's carried unanimously. That's an excellent night's work. Thank you very much, councillors, and an excellent 6 months' work nearly. Thank you very much, councillors. There is no reason to close the meeting to the public, so the meeting is closed at 7:56. Thank you very much.
Tonight, there's a press conference at 8 o'clock with Mark McGowan, so there may be, sounds like maybe more restrictions, so we'll go and tune into that. Yeah, I think, can we turn, do we have a TV here? Okay. The other thing, councillors, is we had an event. There was going to be an event at opening Lincoln Park on Wednesday, and we're going to postpone that because it's all a bit risky, and you know we don't want 150 people or more rocking up with masks on, not social distancing. It won't be a good look for us, so we've decided to pull the plug on that Lincoln Park opening, and we'll postpone it a bit further down the track. And same with Friday night, we were going to have the opening at KPAC, and I think, Gary, you